Hello everyone and welcome to Business Live. My name is Darryl Kwao. Coming up, with barely a day before the presentation of the 2021 budget, former Finance Minister Setekwe is tasking the government to check rising expenditure.
Other expenditures are suspended. That family is being austere. Right? Otherwise, the consequence, like the nation, is to borrow. It's to go borrowing. Right.
Meantime, there are hints government plans to introduce new tax measures or even increase taxes. Is that the right way to go? We'll have a conversation around that. Stay tuned, everyone. Details after this break. Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, former Finance Minister Setekwe says government must introduce stricter measures in the 2021 budget to check rising expenditure. According to him, there will be no space in the budget for excessive public expenditure due to what he says is the current economic hardship and the country's rising debt stock. He has been speaking ahead of the presentation, which is barely 24 hours away.
We are in COVID. In many households, the breadwinner has lost their jobs, beginning even before COVID, with the banking sector crisis, the collapse of the banks, and others. What does a family do? They move into austere mode. Austere mode means food is a priority, school fees is a priority, rent is probably a priority. If you are not in your own house, it's a priority. Many other expenditures are suspended. That family is being austere. Right? Otherwise, the consequence, like the nation, is to borrow. It's to go borrowing. Right? They suspend certain expenditures. And therefore, government will have to follow suit. And that is why I found it, in my tweet recently that, the government is promising 100 billion Ghana cedis, of stimulus into the economy. That is on average. If you divide by 4, that gives you about 25 billion annually. And you divide again by 6, and you're at 4 billion. All right? And that is the amount needed for only infrastructure. But there's no space in the budget for our own money to finance that. So it's borrowing. And the reason I say there's no space is that 2 items in the budget, which is compensation and interest payment, is taking between 105 and 115, depending on the year and the statements, the budget statement you are talking about, is taking 110 to 115%. There was a time when it shot up to almost 145, you added arrears and everything, of tax revenue, which means that you've exhausted your tax revenue and you're even borrowing to pay those 2 items before you come to the amount needed to service government offices, amount needed for development if you borrow the repayment. And so, I remember this excludes amortization, repayment of principal, right? So, I do not think that it's possible to defend investors and others except for those on the periphery.
The thoughts of former Finance Minister Setekwe there. Now, Ghana attracted a foreign direct investment of $2.6 billion in 2020, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. This represents a significant increase of 139% and more than double the inflows from 2019, which stood at $1.1 billion. The CEO of GIPC, YOFI, gave details at a press conference today.
Back of disrupted supply chains and trade globally. And so we expected that we would see a significant drop in foreign direct investment. But incidentally, it didn't happen like that. By the second quarter, we rather saw a leap. And by the first half of last year, 2020, we had already chalked some about $780 million of foreign direct investment. And so it was extremely encouraging. It was very clear that the Ghana story and the Ghana opportunity had hit home. But by the end of the year, we came out with even more remarkable results, and which I'm going to report to you. By December 31st, 2020, total foreign direct investment that we had managed to register and record in our books, and that consists of what comes in through here and the other agencies that also register foreign direct investments, like the Petroleum Commission, the Minerals Commission, the Free Zones Board. And we actually had a remarkable figure of $2.97 million, which is $2.650 billion. Now, this was against all our expectations because of what had happened globally and because of predictions made, and I dare say is a testament to the confidence that investors have in the Ghana economy. Indeed, our numbers tell us that for 2020, Ghana, with Nigeria, attracted the second highest foreign direct investment on the continent. The first was Egypt with about $5.6 billion. Indeed, between Ghana and Nigeria, we both did about $2.6 billion in foreign direct investment.
Now, that is some great news. Let's go back to EMOS Osewusu ANSAH, as Senior Manager at KPMG, as well as Michael Boateng. So, EMOS, I was asking you about how you think we have fared 1 year on since the COVID-19 pandemic hit our economy.
Thank you very much, Daryl. So, as I was saying, the UNDP has indicated that COVID-19 really has been the greatest challenge we have faced globally since World War II. And different countries have been impacted differently. Some obviously have been worse hit. And globally, if you look at the estimates that UNDP puts out there in terms of losses and how it has impacted jobs, about 10.5% of job hours was lost in the first few months of the pandemic alone, which translates to about 305 million of working hours. So that is the kind of impact we are seeing when you come to our own country and the Ghana Statistical Service, the figures they are putting out there also in terms of job losses and how it's impacted people's income. You also see how it's been affecting Ghana. But on the whole, we appear to have weathered the storm better than comparative economies. So although many economies are growing in the negative, Ghana still saw a positive growth rate. Yes, our growth rate was revised from about 6% to 0.9%. But then in comparative terms, it means Ghana still performed better than other economies
and that makes,
who grew negative.
That makes tomorrow's budget presentation very important. You talk about growth rate. The president mentioned an ambitious growth rate of 5% this year. Some have said it is unrealistic, but for the kind of growth the president projects, what or where should be the focus? And do you think it's attainable?
So for the growth the president is projecting, yes, it's slightly higher than what the IMF or World Bank are also projecting, but is it realistic? If we look at the structure of our economy, that services sector is really the lead, and the fact that a lot of the businesses in the service sector were bad hit during the lockdown, that some of these businesses had to close. But now the restrictions have been removed. These businesses are back on board. And so we expect the services sector again to take the lead in growing our economy. So yes, I think it's realistic. Obviously, all of us will continue to look at progress that we'll be making during the year and to review whether we are on track to meeting that target.
All right. And Michael, I believe you're with us. We've got a debt stock that has gone off the roof. Now we need to make money somehow. And so already we are getting hints of plans to increase taxes or create new ones. Should we be doing so, seeing how burdensome the pandemic has been for many?
Thank you, Dara, for your question. I think this is a very interesting question. And if you listen to the former finance minister's point, that saying that there's been businesses have not been doing very well during the pandemic. And then you have on the Ghana government side also having challenges raising money locally, or maybe resorting to borrowing, which also sometimes may have an effect. So the question is, how do you manage the two? And if you look at the key themes that we raised, especially one area, which is the expanding the tax net. In fact, it's a conversation that we've been having all these years. And that how do we raise more, increase the tax net? And it's interesting to note some of the key things that came out from the president's speech when he gave the speech in Parliament just a couple of days ago. He indicated on one, now there will be a policy whereby our national ID card will become the new tax ID. What that means is that, and as he did indicate that just around 2016, we had only about registered taxpayers who had TIN numbers around 750,000. Right. Now, with this new policy, we are now going to have around 15.5 million Ghanaians registered as taxpayers. That is a huge deal. And I think the next question is that with this information and data in front of us, how do we make sure that we have the resources, the technology and others to make sure that this information or what we have actually is utilized to the maximum, to the level that we want. So let's take a step back. Let's assume that we have someone who is selling something and the person has a tax ID. You go through the database, you put this person out, the person is sitting here, the person hasn't filed any tax returns in a long time. The person may be linked with a property, maybe a house. The person may be linked to an account, sitting somewhere, a bank account. And now that gives the revenue authorities the power and also the information to make every decision. Say, listen, now these are the people that we know that they have all these things, but then their taxes, which should reflect their source of revenue and others, should now come in to track that. So I think it's a very good positive thing. What we are all looking for is that we will then deploy all the necessary tools and skills to make sure that we can utilize this information. And I think this is a very, very good information. A very good step. Okay. Now, if you raise the issue also of the pandemic, some of the effects, and my colleague EMOS actually raised the issue. Now, you and I know now looking at one of the key positive things from this pandemic is the expansion of this e-commerce. Now we can sit in the comfort of our home, we can rent a car, we can buy food, we can buy wache and all those things. Now the question is that how do we make sure that revenue authorities have access to this base? So these are all questions that we are hoping that all the measures that will be listed under the tax expansion program, as has been stated, or as the team, we'll make sure that it doesn't become one of those same things that we hear every year, but it's something that we really put our minds to it, because now we have a lot of resources and information to work with.
All right, and so we can agree that the integration of the national ID and the TIN is a good move. Now, the question is whether we have the systems to support it once we widen or expand the tax net. Now, the other question is, if we are expanding the tax net, why introduce new taxes or introduce new tax measures or increase taxes? Somebody may be asking.
And that is an interesting question to have, because as of now, the budget is not out yet. So I don't know what will come out. But one of the things that we always don't talk about whenever tax issues are raised are also tax credits and others which are given. If you and I know that during the pandemic, there were some level of tax waivers when people donate items or stock for pandemic costs. There was a VAT element which it was waived. When if you look at it, there was also another aspect that if taxpayers also had maybe tax issues that they know that they were guilty of, or they know that they flattered the law, as long as they come in and file their returns within some time, all the penalties for not paying taxes on time were also waived. There were also tax credits that were given to certain frontline workers. So sometimes what we tend to see is that whenever we talk about these things, because we lose sight of the good things in terms of tax waivers, tax credits, and others, we lose sight of the bigger picture, some of the benefits that we have out there. And I think from some of these benefits or initiatives are things that we should also, someone would say, just shine our eyes and make sure that we can take advantage of all these things. Okay.
EMOS, could you shed some more light on, I mean, for businesses watching and for government as well, if they are watching, what sort of tax reliefs they could introduce, seeing that we are still dealing with the pandemic? Hi, EMOS.
Thank you very much, Daryl. So really, when it comes to the tax reliefs, Michael has already touched on those ones. Would there be any additional reliefs that the government could be giving? So if we look at our businesses, there is the tax amnesty that obviously when you come and you report that taxes you should have paid, there is that tax amnesty, in place. Do we expect now government to grant more tax reliefs, knowing that already there is a deficit, a high deficit, and we need to bridge this deficit? That is a question that we need to ask. But I think in terms of the other reliefs, Michael has already touched on them.
Which ones would you rather they don't introduce? Right? Okay, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to what my colleague EMOS actually indicated. I mean, there are other options that we can explore. I mean, for instance, we know that the COVID has really affected businesses, and that has really affected it has led to reduction in man hours, so that now the people are being laid off or their hours are being cut. Is it possible to look at a situation where we will say that, okay, how much business will spend on their employees, there could be a tax credit to that. So that let's assume that you will spend about 20,000 throughout the year on your salaries. Instead of you to lay people off to stay afloat, can you just look at issues like giving a percentage of credit so that the businesses will more or less become something that they can offset taxes, and then they still keep people in business, and these are all things that we can look at. But I know that the government and the ministry, that they've looked at all these things, but these are things that they can look at as one of those benefits as to combat the pandemic, the effects of the pandemic. Thank you.
And as we just have 2 minutes on this one, as EMOS pointed out, so with the issue with tax reliefs, then comes we are having a deficit. Our debt is rising. If we introduce tax reliefs, the economy is going to suffer. So what other alternatives should the government look at if we don't want them to borrow, essentially? We just have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Dara. If you look at it very well, we tend to see that when it comes to direct taxes, there's only a small portion of Ghanaians who are paying this tax. And that's why the theme of expanding the tax net is always on play. Now, I can bet you that if we are able to expand the tax net and make sure that a lot of avenues are blocked. So, for instance, the president raised and made the point that through the digitization registration, we are going to have around 7 million households or properties. Now, if we are able to manage and capture all these, and we are able to break in some revenues from property taxes, that is a big deal. Then the revenue money that we have to borrow, we could block it from this area. So these are all options on the table. But I'm happy that now the issue of broadening the tax net is being looked at. But we just want to make sure that we really put a lot of resources and effort in it, because when it's effective, we will talk about less of borrowing, and at least we can look at it from in-house, from in-country, to make sure that we address our own issues. Thank you.
EMOS, you've got 30 seconds. Do you want to add anything?
Thank you very much, Daryl. I think really, Michael is our tax expert, and he has, discussed the tax issues. When it comes to really growing the economy and coming out of this pandemic, what I would like to add is we need to build for better. So we are not only looking at, what is happening now and dealing with the pandemic alone, but how do we want to come out of this going ahead? And when you look at what the IMF and the African Development Bank, some of the things that they are telling us to do is that we need to digitalize the economy, because that is where the world is heading now, AI revolution. And according to the World Economic Forum, in 2025, by 2025, the hours that man and machine will spend will be the same. So how do we build for the better, investing in our infrastructure, in our healthcare, and making sure that people's jobs are protected?
Thank you both, EMOS ANSAH and Michael Boateng, senior managers at KPMG. We'll be watching the presentation with you as well. I'm sure that you'd come back with some analysis for us.